Hello, everyone. It's March 2nd, 2025. It's episode 88 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. Joined with me is Joe Meade. And Joe, we have got a leader in the Big Ten. We've got 1 week left. We've got some bracketology to get to. We've got some Big Ten tournament stuff to get to. But, Joe, a lot of stuff happened since our last podcast. And let's start with your Michigan Wolverines. 2 games in that period. We had a buzzer-beating win from Nimari Burnett Thursday night against Rutgers, a game that Michigan trailed for the entire game pretty much and snatched it at the end. And then what occurred this afternoon on Senior Day against Illinois. But, Joe, the quality of play had been dipping from Michigan. You've gotten away with a couple wins against lower competition, and then today it all came crashing down. So take us through the last week for the Wolverines.
Yeah, truthfully, Sean, I think it's been I'd say an underlying symptom of the Michigan State game. This is a team that consistently gives up second chance points and gives up way too many open looks. And luckily for Michigan, on Monday against Nebraska, that was a display of two teams that played decent defense, but mainly couldn't hit the side of a barn. And then the Rutgers game, let's face it, Sean. Rutgers in the second half blew it. Scored 57 points in the second half. I mean, in the first half. The second half only scoring 25, mainly taking contested jump shots. And even though they have those two top 10 picks, it didn't really make a difference. And today, Illinois completely exposed as to why that's an issue. I think they were plus 11 to 14 in the offensive rebounding category, 14 to 37 from three. For reference, they were 2 of 26 against Duke from three. So complete turnaround in pretty much 8 days for the Illini. And I don't think necessarily Illinois is such a bad loss because we do know what this team is capable of. We've seen them blow out Indiana and Oregon. I think what's most disturbing for Michigan, beyond the standings effect, which of course is a major theme of this episode, is the fact that it was purely because of second chance points. I don't think the turnovers were that egregious today. It wasn't anything uh, more shocking than what's been in the past, but it was really the amount of times Illinois got uh, second or third chances on one possession, and of course they converted. Ben Humberkraus hit some threes. Kylan Boswell was really big today, and Kaspiris Yakonis in the second half, after a pretty bad first half, got to the basket, and they were better without Ivisic in there. Sean, that was my main takeaway from the Illini. Just keeping it at Michigan. Sean, this is a team that can still win the remaining 2 games and get at least a share of this conference. So not completely over, but let's face it, Sean. The last 4 games from the Michigan State game to today, I think for them to come out of it 2-2, it's actually kind of fortunate based on the fact the other two were down to the last shot.
Yeah, this was an interesting one to see. Michigan is 9-3 in their last 12 basketball games with minus 30-point differential. So they've won a ton of close ones, and their losses haven't been particularly close. You go back to the double-digit loss to Michigan State, the 27-33, something like that point loss to Purdue, and then today against Illinois. But, Joe, you do have 2 games left, like you said. You still can control your own destiny for at least a share, except you host the third-ranked team in the conference, and you go to the first-ranked team. So crazier things have happened, but if you're Michigan right now, you probably just take one of those, take your 15-5 record to the NCAA tournament. The viewers can see my projection. I had Michigan as the first 4 seed. This was before today's game. I can't imagine them falling more than a spot or 2. So a protected seed is still in play, which, Joe, I think is very important because those 5 seeds are going to have everything they can handle from that 12 line. Whether VCU falls down there or it's Drake McNeese, UC San Diego, all those teams are top 50 in KenPom, and if you get a neutral court that's far away, that's where I think this becomes danger for Michigan. So I think avoiding the 5 line is of the utmost priority, and I think if you get one of the last 2, I think you'll do that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a complete disaster. I mean, obviously, you look at the
And
big
you
picture.
still should win the game if you play the 12 seed, but let me tell you, I think the 13 seeds are 10 points easier than the 12s right now.
I agree, Sean. And, big picture wise for Michigan, clearly the whole year's been a success.
Oh,
But
yeah.
the last four games have been, there's been three consistent trends. It's been the lack of rebounding, it's been the complete lack of ability to close out on 3-point shooters, and the depth's really got to them. They did get Reuben Jones back today, didn't really make much of a difference. So they got 3 days to figure it out against a really good Maryland team on Wednesday. So yeah, Sean. This team, the one thing I'll give them is they are very unpredictable. So any result on Wednesday, whether it's a blowout, a close win, a close loss, or a blowout loss, will not shock me. So I think my prediction is as good as anyone's, to be honest with you.
And we'll move the calendar to Friday, Joe. Purdue gets off their 4-game losing streak with a 76-66 win over UCLA. The Fighting Mike Cronins still have just one win outside the Western time zone that was at Assembly Hall. But, Joe, this was more of the Purdue that we've been used to this year. You had two great games from their stars, Trey Kaufman-Renn with 29 and Braden Smith with 23 points and 8 rebounds. Joe, it took them a while to break this game open, almost until 4 or 5 minutes left. But Purdue did get two great performances from their good players, but this is sort of the way that they can win games going forward, especially in a even matchup.
Yeah, Sean, I thought, this was typical Purdue, like you just said. I really think Trey Kaufman-Renn was the real MVP of this game, not only scoring-wise, but UCLA. It was pretty clear Tyler Bilodeau was getting tired down by him, and even Mara came in, couldn't really do much of anything, and it kind of opened up shots for Braden Smith. I know Fletcher Loyer didn't have his greatest game, but he still went 3 of 5 from 3, and I think if he hits 3 threes a game and two of their other guys are 20 plus, this is a really hard team to beat. I think that 4-game losing streak kind of nationally allowed people to forget about Purdue. I still think this is a really good team when they're clicking, and I think their depth is still a problem. They did get 5 out of Miles Colvin, 3 out of Cam Heide. Let's face it, in most NCAA tournament games past the first weekend, that's not going to do it. But to beat a UCLA team at home, I think this was, for the mental side of Purdue, I think this was a really important game for them.
I'm not sure UCLA is the best matchup for them. The Bruins have probably the deepest amount of solid players in this conference. They have multiple contributors off the bench. Bilodeau leads the way with 15, but you have Daly, Kobe Johnson who could get going, Mack and Stefanovic off the bench. You have a lot of players that can get going here, and those teams have given Purdue problems in the past, but despite getting out rebounded like crazy, despite not shooting a ton of free throws, they still only turn it over 9 times. They make some threes, they shoot 50% from the field, and they get off their losing streak. And Joe, they can breathe a sigh of relief. They're 12-6, they're 20-9 overall. They might have to play an extra game in the Big Ten tournament, but I think the total wheels are not going to fall off for Purdue. They do have 2 games left. It's Rutgers at home, and then Illinois on the road. I think 1-1 there, you're 13-7 and 21-10 going to the Big Ten tournament. So I think a top 4 protected seed is still in the cards for the Boilermakers. You'd have to think they'd slide up to the first 4 seed.
Yeah.
And look, they're like Michigan, 1-1 stretch before Indianapolis, away from probably staying there, but I'm not sure Purdue has Final Four expectations, but they're still a pretty good team, and the game against UCLA proved that they can still beat good teams.
Yeah, Sean, and like you said, it is of the utmost importance for both those teams who have very clear issues at this stage of the season, being that it's March 2nd. Purdue's lack of depth and Michigan's lack of ability to rebound and score consistently or pull away in games. Those are 2 teams that will benefit from not playing the likes of the 12 seeds this year.
All right, Joe, let's move the calendar to Saturday. We had 4 games, none of them of huge importance except for one. Nebraska, coming off of that really tough loss against Michigan, they got snake bit. Minnesota goes on the road to the bank and wins 67-65. Brennan Rigsby hits the big 3 at the end. And Joe, we were talking about Nebraska probably being one good win away from a lock. They lose that big game against Michigan, then they take a quad 3 home loss here. Nebraska all of a sudden has been dragged close to the bubble. They're likely going to be playing on Wednesday in the Big Ten tournament, and it has not been a great week for Nebraska all around.
No, in terms of honestly, the last 2 weeks, I thought the donkey was going to be Ohio State, but in the last 4 days, they picked up a big win at USC, and then Nebraska. The losing the Michigan game was completely fine, even if they only scored like less than 50 points. I thought that kind of stuff happens. To lose a home game, a quad 3 game to Minnesota, a game they really should have closed out a lot of times, has got to be more than disappointing for Nebraska. And if you look at their finishing stretch, they go to Value City at home to Iowa. I don't know if they necessarily have to win both of those games, but going 0-2 kind of seals their fate for the tournament, you feel like, right, Sean?
Yes, especially because at this point, that first round game in the Big Ten wouldn't be a tournament team. I guess unless they fall even further and maybe the 10 seed would be a tournament team, whether it's Ohio State or Indiana. But yeah, the Michigan game really would have been great. And then unfortunately, they parlayed that with the home loss. I do have Nebraska one slot behind Ohio State right now. And Arkansas is my last team in, and then Oklahoma, and then Nebraska, and then Ohio State. The reason why they're not matched up against each other is because Oklahoma and Arkansas are in the same conference, and Nebraska and Ohio State are. But I do have the two Big Ten teams there a little bit safer than the SEC teams. I don't think they'll play each other in Dayton. They might play each other in Indianapolis. That would be something. But, yeah, it's a 1-1 situation would probably have them in the same spot, like strength of resume-wise now. But as we've seen, if you've stayed in the same spot on the bubble the last 2 weeks, you've gone up. So, maybe you can compete at Ohio State. They're in a desperate spot too. See if you can win it, and then you absolutely have to beat Iowa. So I don't think total panic button yet for Nebraska. They still control their own destiny. They still have 3 games left where if they get 2, they'll be feeling really good about themselves, and if they get just 1, they might be at the risk of getting their bid stolen by a team from the Atlantic 10 or American Conference or something. But not really sure if there's anything to add on Nebraska other than, see if you can pick up a road win.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I can't rule it out. They were dead to rights until they beat Illinois at home, and then they went on the road to Eugene and won. So it's not out of the cards for the Huskers, not even close.
All right, we had a couple other games on Saturday, Joe. Really the only one that had another bubble importance was the Indiana Hoosiers. They go on the road to Alaskan Airlines Arena in Seattle, and they take care of business. 78-62 was the final. Indiana was up double digits for almost this entire game. Malik Renew, 22. Luke Goody, 18. Joe, Indiana couldn't have gained much from this game, but they do get a significant cover in the analytics department, and they make a road win look pretty easy. And all things considered, they are now out of the last 4 in. They are in the last 4 byes.
Yeah, and if you look at their last 2 games, I know Ohio State's no longer a quad 1 home game, but they're playing against 2 teams that are most likely in the tournament, even including Ohio State, just who we're going to talk about probably in a second here. Indiana is, I know this is going to be a question later on, but Sean, I really have to ask it now. Is the only way they miss the tournament if they go 0-3 in their next 3?
Barring a crazy amount of bid stealers, yeah. I mean, I think Indiana's 1 win away from being in without Dayton. You could, and the catch-22 of this is if Ohio State beats Indiana, they'll likely go high enough where Indiana's road win goes to quad 1A. So if that game can be close, but yeah, Indiana's in a 1 more win situation, and they're probably going to be in the field. They're playing really good ball right now, but so is Oregon. Be interesting to see what happens there on Tuesday night. But yeah, they're in a really good position right now. We have talked about it over the years. The committee would love to put a pretty big brand in Dayton. We saw it last year with Virginia, whether they deserve it or not. So maybe Indiana gets dragged back into Dayton We saw them a couple of years ago do that.
It's
When they,
Wyoming, yeah.
yeah, they probably should not have been in Dayton that year, but yeah, the situation for Indiana, we've talked about it, where they would have stood after the Purdue game. I predicted, first couple teams out. It actually turned out that they were in a much better spot then. They beat Penn State, they beat Washington, and by just making their resume a little bit stronger, they've gone up tremendously because a lot of bubble teams have lost, as the Post signified yesterday. But the Hoosiers are in a good spot. And Joe, if they beat Oregon on the road, they could go up into the 8-9s, which is a pretty significant thing considering where they were a couple weeks ago. But, Joe, we got two other games on Saturday. Maryland did have a nice win at Penn State. It was pretty close the entire way. Derek Queen with 23. Still 0 bench points for Maryland, but for now at least, that game wasn't as big enough of a blowout for Penn State to drop out at quad one. And all things considered, it was a quad one road win for Maryland going forward.
Yeah, and mostly for the psyche of Derek Queen. I thought he really struggled in the Michigan State game, which was on Wednesday. I thought MSU did a good job fatiguing him and really taking him out of his element. And that's something MSU, if you've watched them most of the year, aside from the LA trip, let's face it, Sean, they've done a really good job doing that. So the fact Maryland was able to not let that skid into a tough game, and we've seen a lot of really good teams lose at Happy Valley, and it kind of put a fork in their season. So for Maryland to respond that way, I think is really big, and I think this game on Wednesday night in Chrysler is going to be really big to see if Maryland could get back to that protected seed line.
Yeah, I don't think that'll have a huge bit of seeding wise. I guess there's really 3 teams for 2 spots in the double bye conversation, and Maryland would get it with 1 win of the
I'm
last
talking
2, probably.
NCAA.
But
though,
yeah,
Sean.
that's where it really matters. Can Maryland get in? We saw Kentucky take a loss. We saw Arizona take a loss. We saw Missouri take a loss. The 3 of the 4 teams in front of them. Potentially, could they jump Michigan if they beat them? Again, that's a potential. But yeah, this they get a quad 1 win. For now, they don't beat them by too much, so it stays there. I think Penn State's around 70th in the net. That's got to stay in the top 75. And they're 12-6 overall, 22-7. I don't really think that any of these teams, the 3 teams that are fighting for spots 3 and 4, Joe, I'm not sure they really want. They're not in a position where they need to play extra games. If they win a good game or 2 down the stretch here, they'll probably be a protected seed. And then really what happens in the Big Ten tournament for teams already comfortably in the field has not mattered as much. So I think if Maryland wants to get to that 4 seed, I think they probably need to beat Michigan and Northwestern.
Absolutely.
All right, we had the late night game. We had Oregon picking up a nice 20-point win against USC. Joe, they were hot early. They were really cold in the middle. But all of a sudden, you look up and the Ducks have a 5-game winning streak. It included some home wins over Northwestern and Rutgers, a win at Carver Hawkeye against Iowa, that come-from-behind victory at the Kohl Center against Wisconsin, and then a really nice victory against USC. Then they host Indiana, and then they go on the road to Washington, but they might be just outside the realm of a protected seed, but they are playing good basketball now heading into the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah, I think even in that first half at Michigan State, it was really the Michigan road trip. Even though they went 0 for 2 on that stretch, you saw the flashes of the team that started the year as high ranked as, I believe, number 9 or 10, Sean. They got
Yeah, I think 9. I'm
maybe
seeing 9 here.
Yeah, so I think maybe this team should. I still think you have to consider Jack Shelstad's still a pretty young guy, and aside from Nate Biddle, no one on that team is that accustomed to this kind of play, especially in this competition in the Big Ten. So I look at their remaining schedule. They went out. That's 23-8, and if you look at their 8 losses, Sean, none are particularly bad. I mean, probably the worst one is the home game to Nebraska. The Minnesota one I kind of nullify because we see a lot of teams lose to Minnesota at this stage, and I don't think Minnesota is as bad as their 93 ranking might project. Outside of that, though, Sean, 6 quad 1 losses, and for them to respond this way, I think they're clicking at the right time, barring a disaster, which is what I think it would take to lose one of their last 2 games, especially the home game against Indiana and then Washington. Uh, I think this is going to be one of the more like subtly hot teams, if that phrase makes sense, Sean, going into March. So, and let's face it, they do better against non-Big Ten competition. We saw that earlier in the year, which is how they got off to that. I think they were 10-0 or 11-0 at one point, Sean. So this could be a team that a lot of people are going to talk about Illinois, perhaps a Wisconsin. I think Oregon should also be in that discussion as well.
Yeah, and you look at the standings there, and Oregon is probably going to be playing Indiana again in the 8-9 game. I do not. Illinois has a tiebreaker over Oregon, so they'd have to win the last two, and Illinois would have to lose their last game. But it's pretty likely that Oregon's going to get two cracks at Indiana here, which at the point is a win against a tournament team. But it'll be interesting to see this game against Oregon versus Indiana, two teams really playing great ball right now, and we have seen some teams struggle with Indiana's offense, and we've seen some teams struggle with Oregon's offense too. Others look great against it, so is it a combination of some favorable matchups and a little bit of an easier schedule, or are these teams actually playing really good ball? I think you can ask those questions of both teams, but it really will probably only matter what jersey color the team is wearing for the rematch. But as of now, it's a big one. Oregon can pick up moves closer to that protected seed line, and Indiana could stamp their place in the field. But Joe, we that was it for Saturday. That was it for Sunday. We went through both the games, and then we talked about Indiana, Oregon. We talked about Nebraska, Ohio State coming up. We talked about Maryland and Michigan. And Michigan State goes on the road to Iowa on Thursday. Purdue on the road to Illinois on Friday. And then we have 4 games on Saturday and 4 games on Sunday. And then the regular season is over. We're not sure we'll get another episode in before the end of the regular season. But, Joe, we've got some bracketology stuff, and then we're going to get into some scenarios for Big Ten tournament seeding.
Yeah. Sean, we do have a lot of questions, and a lot came in after both games today, as you could imagine. Do you want to start teeing off on them right now?
Yeah, let's do that.
Awesome. From Patrick, consistent question asker, big Michigan State guy. Thank you, Patrick. After Michigan State's 2 quad one wins this week and 5 quad one wins in a row, good call out there by Patrick. Is it possible they could sneak to a 1 seed line? This has been a popular question. What say you, Sean?
I don't think so. I think there's really 3 teams fighting for that last number 1 seed. I think it's impossible to catch the top 3, being Auburn, Duke, and Houston. And Tennessee, Alabama, and Florida are very close to each other. And then there's a significant gap to Michigan State at 7. So, Michigan game is at home. You beat Wisconsin at home today. I still don't think that Wisconsin win moved them it did move them closer, but didn't move them up at all. But no, I don't think a number 1 seed is on the cards. And you'd say, well, they could get some more wins to win the Big Ten tournament. I don't think the committee's going to pay attention to that. They haven't in the past.
From Hunter, I believe is placement. He's got to be an Ohio State fan. From Hunter, who appears to be an Ohio State fan. I hope I didn't get that wrong. What more does Ohio State have to do to make the tournament this year? And then, just to remind the viewership, they host Nebraska and go to Assembly Hall, followed by a Big Ten tournament game.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, Joe, because they have a significantly better resume than sort of the rest of the bubble. They're 39th across the average metrics, and I've added a 4th metric into what I average. It's the new NCAA WAB, wins against bubble. I have no idea how that's calculated, but it's on the team sheet, so I've added it into mine. The other bubble teams are in the 40s and the 50s with worse records and less amount of quad 1 wins. Ohio State's sitting there at 5-9. Nebraska's also at 5-9, but they have got 2 quad 3 losses plus 20 spots worse in resume. So I think Ohio State probably needs 1 more win. And so if they win 1 more of their 3 remaining games, that would put them 2 games over. So that might not be enough. They might need to win 2 out of their last 3, which would end up being 2 of 4. But yeah, if they're 17 and 15, if their win comes against Nebraska, and then they lose to Indiana, that put them at 17 and 14, and then they would go into the Big Ten tournament likely the 10 seed against Illinois or UCLA. If they drop that, they'd go to 17 and 15. It would be hard to leave them out then. No team has ever made it 2 games over, but that really comes in, do they want to break precedent? Ohio State's definitely going to be good enough at 17 and 15, but I think we're projecting a lot there. But it really comes down to that. I think it would be enough to get them in over this subpar bubble, but maybe not.
Well explained there by Sean.
Did we lose you, Joe?
You're back.
Oh, you're
Sorry.
back. Okay.
I just say that's very well done. Even if I had that scripted, I would not have memorized that. Question from Martin, who's a Maryland fan. With Kentucky, Michigan, Arizona, I believe he said Missouri, the only team within the 4-5 line that has not lost this week is Maryland, Oregon, and Clemson. Who has a better chance of advancing / going down from that line? So I guess between Purdue, Michigan, Maryland, Oregon, Michigan and Purdue you have on the 4 line, Oregon and Maryland on the 5 line. Who do you believe has a more significant chance to increase their odds to get one of those protected seeds?
I think it's probably Michigan because they have the road game at Michigan State. Purdue also has a road game against Illinois. They definitely have a chance to get up into the 3s, especially with Tech and A&M up there playing in good conferences. They could take losses. Oregon goes 0-2 down the stretch. They probably drop to a 6, maybe even a 7. But again, I don't think we're going to see as much movement as we have from the 1 to the 6 seed lines. I think a lot of the movement's going to be 7 to bubble, and really that's it. The movement's going to come 7 to bubble. I think Oregon, Maryland, Michigan, and Purdue, I don't think they're going to finish 1 seed line different than where they are now.
Absolutely. All right, final question, Sean, and we're going to try to answer as much of these as possible because we do want to get into some Big Ten tournament scenarios. Final question from, just going to scroll this a bit, from Noah, who is a Michigan fan, but asking a general Big Ten question. What leagues, and I know you mentioned a few of them, what leagues would have the most significant number of bid stealers?
So this is one that is starting to become big. I would say there's 2 that are really, really dangerous, and that would be the Atlantic 10 and the American Conference, with one team that will definitely get in. Maybe not definitely, but probably get in. That leaves a lot of chances for bid stealing. And that would be Memphis in the American. I think North Texas is really good. Florida Atlantic is playing better. So if you're on the bubble, root for Memphis in that tournament. And then VCU as well. They have probably carved themselves a good enough resume to get in anyway. So the Atlantic 10 tournament, which is down in Washington, D.C. this year, those are 2 ones that I would definitely look out for. And then the other ones that are maybes are, the ACC. They've got 4 tournament teams. Somebody gets their way into the semifinals. Who knows? Last year we saw that bid stolen by NC State. And then the Mountain West is another one too. 4 tournament teams right now. You've got some teams in the mix there like Colorado State who could potentially win it all. But those 4 would be my ones to look out for. I think there's a chance the Big West runner-up could get in, especially if it's UC San Diego. But again, I don't think that UC San Diego is going to lose. They've been crushing everybody. So those 5 are possible. And then, of course, every conference has a chance for a bid steal, but those are the most likely.
Got it. That wraps up those bracketology questions. We will do a lot more on, I think we're probably going to shoot 2 before Selection Sunday. Obviously, 1 recapping kind of the end of the regular season, then probably 1 more, at least 1 more before the Big Ten tournament. So, Sean, we went through all those bracketology questions. Now, we did want to get some seating situations for the Big Ten tournament, if you did have the standings up.
Okay, so, Joe, we're going to go to bballknownothing.net, and there's a tool here where we can predict the final couple games, and then it'll give us what the standings are going to be. So we've got 3 sets of games here, and we're going to start with March 2 to 4, Michigan against Illinois. That already these games already happened today, so let's fill them. These games already, or Northwestern, UCLA, that's tomorrow, I believe.
Yep.
Ohio State, Nebraska, Oregon, Indiana, Purdue, Rutgers. Okay, so Illinois and Michigan State already won. We've got Northwestern and UCLA tomorrow. Let's come to a conclusion of who we think is going to win that one.
I'm going to go with the Bruins, Sean.
Yep, Bruins -2.5. Northwestern has been playing better, but UCLA has been in the Midwest. They already played Purdue, so yeah, I'm going to go with the Bruins too. And then Ohio State, or Nebraska at Ohio State on Tuesday.
Give me the Buckeyes.
I think so also. I think Oregon at Indiana, I think that's going to be a lot closer than people think, but I'll go with the Ducks there, and then I'll go with Purdue at home to Rutgers. I don't think you'll have any.
I don't object to any of those, Sean.
Okay. So now let's move on to the next batch of games here. We've got Michigan at home against Maryland.
I'll give Michigan the benefit of the
Yeah,
doubt, but I do it hesitantly. I think that's going to be a really tight spread, maybe even a pick-em on some books.
All right, Wisconsin goes to the barn. Interesting one here. Minnesota's been playing some good ball recently, and they're probably going to be in the Big Ten tournament. I think, again, Joe, this is a true toss-up. We've gone chalk so far. I think let's give the Golden Gophers this one.
Yeah, I think playing a real desperate team is something that we're going to see being a big effect in this last week of the regular season. So let's give the Gophers the benefit of the doubt.
Okay, we've got USC hosting Washington. I think let's give USC the ball here.
Yep.
Desmond Claude is back and looking pretty good, and at home they should take care of business. All right, Iowa hosting Michigan State, potential trap game here. But Joe, with the potential title on the line, I cannot see the Spartans.
No, I can't imagine MSU, the way they've won 5 straight quad one games with a Hall of Fame head coach known for discipline and yelling at his players. Let's face it, they're not losing this game.
All right, Illinois hosts Purdue. Interesting one. Illinois playing a little bit better ball recently, 2 wins in a row. Purdue has gotten off their losing streak. Interesting one here. Who are you going for?
I'm going to go with the Fighting Illini. I maybe that's a mistake because they've been anything but consistent all year, but I think they've figured it out, and maybe if they shoot the ball better. If Illinois shoots the ball well shot, I think they're actually a top 12, 15 team.
And they haven't really for a while, but they did today against Michigan. All right, last batch of games here, Saturday and Sunday next week. UCLA hosting USC. I think you got to give the benefit of the doubt to the Bruins at home. All right, Indiana hosting Ohio State. Indiana wins game 1-1 back in January in overtime. And in our scenario here, Indiana did lose to Oregon. So do the Hoosiers get in with a victory against Ohio State?
I think they do. I think it's going to be a really close game, though, Sean.
Maryland, Northwestern, Maryland at home. You got to go with the
Maryland.
Terps, right?
Yep. Terps.
Okay, Wisconsin at home against Penn State. Again, got to go with the Badgers. All right, potentially the Big Ten title decider here. Michigan State hosting Michigan.
Until Michigan gets out of its own way, until Michigan State slips up, you got to go with the Spartans.
Okay, Nebraska hosting Iowa. I think the Cornhuskers, they absolutely need this one, and let's give it to them. Rutgers hosting Minnesota. I think we go with the home team here, and then I have
Knights.
Oregon beating Washington on the road to end the season. All right, Joe.
And Washington's already eliminated, just so everyone knows.
Yep, with their loss to Indiana yesterday, they got eliminated. All right, let's calculate the seeds. All right, a ton of tie-breaking scenarios here. All right, we've got our pretend bracket, Joe. We've got Nebraska, Minnesota in the 12-13. That's a big drop for Nebraska with some tiebreakers. USC, Ohio State in the 10-15.
Wow.
Rutgers, Northwestern in the 11-14. Indiana, Oregon in the 8-9. Then we got UCLA at the 5, Illinois at the 7, Wisconsin at the 6, Michigan at the 2, Purdue at the 3, Maryland at the 4. So that would essentially give Ohio State and Nebraska both an extra game by making them play on Wednesday against non-tournament teams. We have Indiana against Oregon round 2, as I mentioned earlier. And then we have... that's really going to be the storyline from the Big Ten tournament, I think. Unless a team that is not in the field gets to the semifinals. I think we're going to have the bubble teams. Can they win one, maybe two games? And then after that, I don't think it's going to mean a whole lot.
Yeah, Sean, and go through seeds. I know you did the Wednesday. Go through the Thursday seeds. I know they're not slated to play anyone yet, but
we've got. Or do you want me to go in order?
Yeah,
we got Sparty 1, Michigan 2, Purdue 3. They get the tiebreaker over Maryland, UCLA, and Wisconsin. So Wisconsin drops all the way to the 6 in this scenario. UCLA 5, Maryland 4. Maryland gets the double bye. Then we have Illinois at the 7. That seems pretty likely right now. Oregon, Indiana at the 8-9. Then we have Ohio State at the 10, which is a Wednesday seed this year, hasn't been in the past. Rutgers at the 11, Minnesota at the 12, Nebraska at 13, Northwestern at 14, USC at 15, and then Iowa, Penn State, and Washington will not be going to Indianapolis. But really, I think the only crazy game, really only the upset we picked was Minnesota over Wisconsin, Joe, and that's actually going to really bring them down.
That affects a lot of it, yeah.
Yeah, that brings them down to a 6, and in our scenario, they'll be playing the winner of Northwestern and Rutgers. And then they did beat Purdue at Mackey, potential, another game against Purdue in the state of Indiana. But this would be a heavy early tournament storyline if it ends up like this, I think. If it for Ohio State purposes, Joe, it might be better not to get up to the 9.
Yeah, Sean. And, obviously the catch-22 of that is you do want to win both your remaining games if it's up to you, or at least one of them. So a whole lot of situations. I doubt. I'm just gonna throw a line out there and say me and Sean's predictions in game by game. I think even 1 or 2 off really throws a wrench in this whole thing. I think if Michigan State wins Thursday, even if they drop the game to Michigan and they tie for the conference title, I think they have the tiebreaker over Michigan, and they'd be the one.
So it would then go to their records against Purdue if Purdue is third. It would then go to how they did against the third place team.
Yeah.
And which in that situation, let's see here.
I think MSU would still get it because
let's switch that game. Let's switch it. We can go back. So we are now giving Michigan the victory against Michigan State. Is that the only game you want to flip?
Just to see how the one's affected. Yeah.
All right. So now Michigan is given the one here, Joe, because it's not just the third place team; it's all the teams tied for third. So Michigan went 4-1 against the teams at 13 and 7 in the scenario: Purdue, Maryland, UCLA, Wisconsin, and Michigan State went 3-1. So again, maybe there is something to play for Michigan here. I don't know if a 1 is a whole lot better than a 2 in terms of trying to win thing. I mean, you're going to play a tournament team in your first game either way. But, so that would be interesting. Now, let's go back and go back to Michigan State winning, but then let's go to Wisconsin winning against Minnesota. And then that brings Wisconsin all the way up to 3rd. So the Badgers they do control their own destiny for that 3 seed. But, Joe, it doesn't seem like they can get the double bye without going 2-0 in our little exercise here.
And that's crazy.
Yeah. And Purdue looks like they are going to have a tiebreaker over Maryland or UCLA. They did beat both of those teams. So, and that is, you can see the tiebreaker here. If you're tied with more than 2, it's a round robin between the 3 or 4 of you. And for seeding purposes, Purdue likes to have a tiebreaker there. So, Joe, we've got a lot of different scenarios that can happen here. We've just got 2 games left for most teams. 1 for Illinois. They're already 11-8, but interesting way, to look at this. Maybe we get to an episode later in the week and we do this again with the midweek results, but a lot on the line. You've got a Nebraska going up to the 12 in this scenario. Ohio State's still at the 10. So Nebraska, instead of being the 13, all right, I think they would play Northwestern instead of Minnesota. So, again, I don't think that they really need to win that game regardless of who they're playing, but it seems likely now, Joe, that Ohio State and Nebraska are going to be playing on Wednesday. That might not be a bad thing for them. If Indiana can win one, they're going to be in the 8-9 game, which would be against Oregon, which would be a tournament team. But again, I do think, again, you got to win some games, but the 3 bubble teams here have a decent chance of making the field, I think, barring 5 bid steals.
Yeah, Sean, and we just went over a bunch of scenarios. It's very likely there are like 30 more we could go over.
Yeah.
We could be here all night. So give the viewers the website just in case they want to tool around with some of the situations we didn't.
And you can do this on any conference, not just the Big Ten. It's bball.knownothing.net, and you can predict the remaining games in the whatever conference you'd like, and then it would spit out a tournament bracket based on your predictions, and it's really cool. I think we may have done something with it last year, but still a lot to play for. We might not have as much on the line as we did a few years ago, Joe, where if you won on the last day, you were a 2 seed, and if you lost, you were the 9 seed. But again, tiebreakers are going to come in handy. Teams that don't really need to play more basketball games definitely want to get a bye. And then teams that do need some wins, maybe they do want to play some more games, especially against some of those teams that will be playing on Wednesday. So, Joe, I think unless you got anything else to add, let's wrap it up here.
Yeah, Sean, and I think we will be back later this week, if not next weekend, either to preview the title clash at East Lansing or to recap it. So,
yeah, well, we'd like to thank everybody for coming and watching today. We've got 2 games left in the Big Ten. Going to be doing a couple more videos on the channel, whether it's with Mike for some mid-major picks, some conference player of the year. We're going to do that before the end of the season, because after the end of the regular season, it's going to be conference tournament previews and all that. Might have some bracketology specific videos and maybe even some game sporkles. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.